Hello everyone. As always, I want to give a special shout out to all of you who have subscribed to my channel, those who give me constant support and love the horror stories that I write myself. I would also like to ask those who are on the channel for the first time to like this video and subscribe to the channel, so that our creepy community grows and scary stories reach a wider circle of people who love creepypasta horror stories. For tonight, I wrote a psychological horror thriller story about neighbors. How things can get out of control when you have neighbors who are too noisy. I'm eager to find out if you like it. Let me know in the comments. Enjoy the creepy horror story and stay until the end to find out how it all ended. The first time I heard them, I assumed they were just settling in. New neighbors always make noise while moving furniture, unpacking boxes, finding their rhythm in a new home. But 3 months later, Doug and Adriana Mendez had turned my peaceful suburban existence into a living nightmare. Their house sat barely 15 feet from mine, a fact I hadn't considered important when I bought my home 5 years ago. The previous owners had been an elderly couple who rarely opened their windows and spoke in whispers. The Mendez, however, treated their home like an amphitheater. They kept their windows open constantly, even during the mild winter months, claiming they needed fresh air. Their voices carried across the narrow gap between our houses, bouncing off the vinyl siding and straight through my walls. Their massive stereo system, which seemed to only play Latin music at earth-shattering volumes, might as well have been installed in my living room. I tried to be reasonable at first. That's what normal people do, isn't it? I walked over one Sunday afternoon, bearing a homemade apple pie and my best neighborly smile. I introduced myself as Andrea Yates, explained that I worked as a pediatric nurse with early morning shifts, and politely asked if they could keep their windows closed during sleeping hours. Adriana answered the door in a red dress that seemed too bright for our beige suburban street. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Of course, Carita," she said, taking the pie. "We understand completely." Behind her, Doug's massive frame filled the hallway, his dark eyes studying me with unsettling intensity. That night, they hosted what sounded like a carnival. Music blasted until 3 a.m., their windows wide open, voices and laughter echoing through the neighborhood. I lay in bed, pillow wrapped around my head, wondering if I'd somehow made things worse by complaining. The lack of sleep began affecting my work. After nearly administering the wrong dosage to a patient, I knew something had to change. I started documenting everything, recording the noise levels, filing complaints with the neighborhood association, even calling the police when their parties got particularly outrageous. Nothing worked. The police would come, they'd quiet down for a night, and then it would start again. The neighborhood association sent strongly worded letters that the Mendezes used as coasters for their drinks. I could see them stacked on their windowsill. I tried soundproofing my bedroom wall, but it cost a fortune and barely made a dent. I installed triple pane windows, but their bass frequencies still penetrated everything. White noise machines, earplugs, sleeping pills. Nothing helped. The noise seemed to seep into my bones, into my dreams. Then I found it, buried deep in an online forum about neighbor disputes. A post about skunk tincture, a concentrated form of the animal's notorious spray. The user claimed it was untraceable once it dried, but would create an unbearable stench when exposed to heat or moisture. Last resort for nightmare neighbors, the post said. They'll keep their windows closed tight. I shouldn't have ordered it. I know that now. But after another week of sleepless nights, of watching my physical and mental health deteriorate, I convinced myself it was justified. The small bottle arrived in unmarked packaging, looking innocent enough. I waited for a night when they were particularly loud. Their latest party gave me courage as I crept along the side of their house at 3 a.m. My hands shook as I carefully poured the tincture along their windowsills, making sure to get it into every crack and crevice. The liquid was clear and odorless, another small mercy. The next morning, I watched through my kitchen window as chaos erupted. Adriana came running out their front door, hand over her mouth, gagging. Doug followed, his face contorted in disgust. They called exterminators, plumbers, even the gas company. Everyone was baffled by the overwhelming stench that seemed to have no source. For 3 weeks, their windows stayed shut tight. The noise levels dropped dramatically as they spent less and less time in their house. I slept through the night for the first time in months. The guilt gnawed at me, yes, but the blessed silence was worth it, or so I thought. It was exactly 23 days after I applied the tincture that I noticed something odd. Their car, usually parked in their driveway, hadn't moved in over a week. The lights in their house stayed off, but sometimes, late at night, I thought I saw shadows moving behind their curtains. And the smell, that horrible, acrid stench, had changed somehow. It was deeper now, earthier, with an underlying sweetness that reminded me of decay. One night, as I lay in bed enjoying the silence, I heard something new. Not the usual chaos from next door, but a soft, rhythmic scratching. At first, I thought it was coming from inside my walls. But as I pressed my ear against the cool plaster, I realized it was coming from their house, scratch, 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 like something trying to get out, or something trying to get in. The silence lasted exactly 47 days. I know because I marked each blessed quiet day on my calendar with a small red X, like a prisoner counting down their sentence. But as the days stretched on, the silence began to feel less like freedom and more like a weight pressing down on my chest. The Mendez house stood dark and still, its windows permanently sealed against the lingering stench. Their mail piled up until I started bringing it in myself, stacking it neatly on my kitchen counter. I told myself I was being a good neighbor, but really, I couldn't stand looking at the overflowing mailbox, a visible sign of my guilt. I called the police once, reporting them as missing persons. Officer Harper came by, took my statement, and walked around their house. "No signs of forced entry," he said, scribbling in his notepad. "Their car's gone, mail's being collected, and there's no evidence of foul play. Looks like they just up and left, Mom. Can't say I blame them with that smell." The smell. It had changed over the weeks, evolving into something I couldn't quite describe. Sometimes, when the wind blew just right, it reminded me of wet earth after rain. Other times, it carried notes of something sweeter, almost floral, but with an underlying rot that made my stomach turn. That's when the cat showed up. I first noticed it on my security camera, a scraggly thing with matted black fur. It sat on the Mendez's front porch for hours, staring at their door with an unsettling intensity. When I zoomed in on the footage, I could see its fur was clumped and sticky looking, as if it had rolled in something. 3 nights later, I heard scratching at my own front door. When I opened it, there sat the cat, reeking of that same sickly sweet smell that now permeated the Mendez house. Before I could stop it, it darted between my legs and disappeared into my home. I spent 2 hours looking for it that night, armed with a can of tuna and a growing sense of dread. I finally found it in my spare bedroom, curled up on the windowsill that faced the Mendez house. When I approached, it turned to look at me with eyes that seemed too aware, too knowing. "You can stay," I heard myself say, "but just for tonight." That was my first mistake. The cat made itself at home, appearing and disappearing at will. Sometimes I'd wake up to find it sitting on my chest, its yellow eyes fixed on mine, purring with a sound that seemed to vibrate through my bones. Other times, it would sit for hours at my bedroom window, tracking something I couldn't see. I started having dreams, vivid, disturbing dreams that left me gasping awake in the middle of the night. In them, I was always in the Mendez house, walking through rooms that seemed to stretch and distort like funhouse mirrors. I could hear Adriana's laugh echoing from somewhere ahead, but no matter how many doors I opened, I could never find her. The cat was always in these dreams, leading me deeper into the house, its matted fur leaving a trail of that sickly sweet smell. In one particularly vivid nightmare, it led me to the master bedroom, where I found Doug's massive form silhouetted against the window. When he turned, his face was just wrong somehow, like someone had tried to draw him from memory but couldn't quite get the proportions right. I started sleeping less and less. The silence that I'd once craved became oppressive, broken only by the cat's occasional yowls, sounds that didn't quite sound feline anymore. They were deeper, more guttural, almost like words spoken in a language I couldn't understand. One night, about 2 months after the Mendezes disappeared, I woke to the sound of music. Faint, barely audible, but unmistakably coming from their house. It was the same Latin music they used to play, but slowed down, distorted, as if being played underwater. I got out of bed and went to my window. The Mendez house stood dark as ever, but now I could see a faint glow moving behind the curtains, like someone walking with a phone's flashlight. The cat sat on my windowsill, its tail twitching in time with the distorted music. That's when I noticed the smell had changed again. The sweetness was gone, replaced by something metallic and sharp, like copper pennies left in the sun. And underneath it all, I could hear something new, a soft, rhythmic sound coming through my wall, thump, 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 like footsteps, like heartbeats, like something trying to get my attention. The cat turned to look at me, and in the dim light, I could have sworn it smiled. That's when I realized what had been bothering me about its matted fur. It wasn't just sticky with something, it was stained. Stained with the same dark, rusty color that was now seeping through my shared wall with the Mendez house, spreading across my white paint like spilled wine. And then, just barely audible over the distorted music and the rhythmic thumping, I heard Adriana's voice, as clear as if she were standing right next to me. "We still need fresh air, querida. Won't you open a window?" That voice changed everything. I called in sick to work the next day, something I'd never done before in my 5 years at the hospital. I couldn't bear the thought of leaving my house, of turning my back on whatever was happening next door. The cat sat in my living room window all morning, its tail twitching as it stared at the Mendez house, as if waiting for a show to begin. I spent hours researching the skunk tincture I'd ordered, scrolling through countless forums and websites. Most were dead ends or obvious scams, but then I found something buried in an archived thread from 15 years ago. A user named Filbert the Wise had posted a warning about a specific variety of skunk essence, harvested during a lunar eclipse from animals found in an old Native American burial ground. "It doesn't just keep people away," the post read. "It thins the veil between here and somewhere else. If you use it, you're not just marking territory, you're marking a doorway." I dismissed it as supernatural nonsense, the kind of story people share around digital campfires. But then I noticed the date of the post. Exactly 15 years ago to the day, and the user's last login. 23 days after posting the warning, the same number of days it took for the Mendezes to disappear. The cat meowed then, a sound so human-like it made me slam my laptop shut. When I looked up, it was standing in my hallway, its matted fur now seeming to shift and move in the dim light, like shadows dancing on water. It turned and walked toward my spare bedroom, the one that shared a wall with the Mendez house. I followed, because by then I knew I had no choice. The room was cold, much colder than it should have been on a summer afternoon. The wall we shared with the Mendez house had changed. The rust-colored stains from last night had spread, forming patterns that seemed almost like words in a language I'd never seen, and they were moving. That's when I heard the whispers. They came from inside the walls at first, a soft susurration like dry leaves scraping against concrete. But gradually, they grew clearer. I could hear snippets of conversations I'd recorded months ago during my documentation of the Mendez noise. Fragments of their arguments, their laughter, their music. But now they were distorted, playing at wrong speeds, overlapping with other sounds that had no place in a suburban home. The cat's purring grew louder, synchronizing with the whispers, until they became a single, pulsing drone. The stains on the wall began to move faster, spreading across the ceiling now, forming shapes that reminded me of hands reaching down. I ran from the room, slamming the door behind me. I spent the rest of the day in my kitchen, watching the sun set through windows that seemed to grow darker too quickly. The cat didn't follow me, but I could hear its purring through the walls, growing louder and deeper as night fell. Around midnight, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but when I answered, I heard something that made my blood freeze. Latin music, slowed down to a grotesque crawl, and underneath it, Adriana's laugh. "We miss you, querida," her voice whispered through static. "Won't you join us for dinner? Doug is cooking something special." I hung up and threw the phone across the room. It shattered against the wall but kept ringing, the screen glowing with impossible brightness. The ringtone had changed to that deep mechanical purr. That's when the shadows began to move. I ran to my bedroom, locking the door behind me, but I could hear them following, the cat's claws clicking on the hardwood, the shadows sliding under the door like oil, bringing with them that sickly sweet smell that I now recognized as the scent of transformation. The whispers grew louder, and I could finally understand what they were saying. They were counting down, using different voices, different languages, but all counting down to something I didn't want to witness. I heard scratching at my bedroom door, followed by a sound I'd never forget, the soft click of the lock turning on its own. As the door slowly creaked open, I heard Doug's voice, but it came from everywhere and nowhere at once. "We're not gone, Andrea. We're just quieter now." The cat stepped into my room, its body now a void in the shape of a feline, trailing shadows like smoke. Behind it, I could see Doug and Adriana's forms taking shape in the darkness, their bodies composed of the same writhing shadows, their smiles too wide, too sharp. "Welcome to the quiet side," Adriana's voice echoed from the void. "We left a window open for you